happy to talk to you about AI ethics, since it's a topic that's becoming increasingly important in our rapidly evolving tech landscape. Before we dive in, just let me tell you about myself. I'm Veronica, and I'm a PhD student in computer science and human-computer interaction at UIC, and my research focus is about gender bias. Before that, I have a double degree master's between Polyme and UIC, and I worked in gender bias at the CRA, widening participation for women in Minnesota last year, and I was awarded for innovative research for newly grad women in STEM. This is what we're going to talk about today. First of all, I want to explain a little bit why this is important. Then I'll talk about the impact of gendering in everyday life, and then I'll dive in a little bit into my research, and then I'd like to have some discussion about what's next. So to understand the importance of AI ethics, let's start with a simple question. What AIs do you usually interact with in your daily life?
ChatGPT?
Yes, ChatGPT, of course. Anything else? You know? Anyone else? Maybe some voice assistants like Siri, Alexa?
Gemini?
Mm-hmm. And how do you interact with them?
Do you count Siri as an AI at this stage?
I think so. I think that for the scope of this presentation, we can consider it an AI. And I would like to go through very quick exercise. What prompt would you input to an LLM to create an image of an English teacher in a preschool class? Anyone want to go ahead?
I'll try it.
Yes, thank you.
Show a human teacher in front of a preschool class.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Have the teacher guiding a group of children as students through a lesson in colors.
Okay, what about, this is for an image, so what about something about the appearance of the teacher?
You're trying to get me to name gender-specific terminology, but I'm not going to.
Okay.
Teacher who is an adult in their 30s.
Okay. And what about this other prompt? An image of an experienced surgeon about to enter the OR. Does anyone want to go ahead?
So for all of these, we usually just say that, but then the AI might give us a gender stereotyping response. It might give us a female kindergarten teacher. It might give us a male experienced surgeon, even though we didn't ask for it.
Yes, and that is exactly my point. That is what I did. And this is what came out of it. So basically, when I prompted an LLM to give some prompt to generate an image, what they said was a middle-aged woman with comfortable and stylish outfit, with a long hair, heart-shaped face, and smiling. And this was the image that was created afterwards. And the same thing happened for the surgeon. So basically, mid to late 50s, dressed in a crisp surgical gown with really strong and angular features and sharp jawline. And this was the image that was generated by him. Of course, as you were also mentioning, this is not something that might always happen. Like some of the most advanced AIs have already some guidelines and safeguards in place, but this is what we expect and what happens when we input data into a small open weight AI, like in this case I used Llama 3.1, and the temperature is 0, so the output was deterministic, so you can try it. Basically, like, these are the steps to applying AI, as you might all know. Before we have to identify a problem and then collect some data, choose an AI model or algorithm, and then process the data to train the model, and then evaluate it and do this process over and over again iteratively. But what if when we collect the data and we train the tool, we as humans already input some bias into it? The mental images that we have, even if they're not as evident as we might think, still make their way through the data. And this is why it is very important to understanding and to addressing bias in AI, and this is crucial. Also because, as you know, AI is everywhere right now. These are just some simple examples of it from business, entertainment, social, and every single one of these applications can significantly impact people's lives. And they can reinforce existing inequalities or even create new ones. So now I want to talk a little bit about the impact of gendering. Some of you might not think that that is a thing in technology, but there are some psychology research studies that show that it is wired into our brains to ascribe gender. Even for machines and for like robots, or even for anything that's just really simple that we interact with, we try to anthropomorphize them. I don't know, does any one of you own a Roomba, for example? Do you have a name for it? Do you talk to it? But yeah, I was thinking of my mother. She has a Roomba and she gave it a name. She always talks to it. She even scolds it. And that is just a black box moving on the ground. So that is just to show how gender starts from very little. We pour these biases into AI and machines very frequently, and we address them and perceive them so in gendered ways. There are two main factors in these relationships that we have, warmth and competence. Warmth is about the perception of someone's intentions, so if they're friendly, if they are trustworthy, if they're moral. And competence is about the ability to act on those intentions. So if someone's capable, intelligent, and skilled. And this is shown in research that those hedonic and utility attitudes really go into long-term adoption of any kind of technology. But this brings us to our issue, because there is some impression management dilemma, mainly for genders, so for women, that are often perceived as warm but incompetent, or the other way around, competent but cold. So according to the stereotype content model, these ambivalent stereotypes really generate these impressions of women being perceived as either disrespected or disliked. And this is not only for women in the interaction, but also if we ascribe a feminine gender to the technology. There are some factors that help us ascribe gender more quickly. Can anyone try to tell some? Voice, perfect, that's a very important one, and in fact one of the most immediate ones. Anything else?
Word choice?
Word choice, yes, very good. Pronouns? Pronouns, that's a very good one. Yeah, basically the main ones are voice, appearance, tasks, so word choice, and the kind of interaction that we have. Some of the examples are obviously for the voice, some like voice assistants like Alexa. We give it a name, we give it a default voice, and then we can recognize some speech patterns and intonations into it, but also gendered language. That applies not only to voice, but to any kind of language, so also an LLM like ChatGPT. This also impacts appearance. Anything that is physical in front of us might remind us of a masculine or feminine gender by design, so the body shape. In this case, the robot that I put up there is called Pepper, and it has this really tiny waist, really big eyes, and the color scheme chosen for it is this really elegant white. So one of the first impressions that someone might have would be to gender it as feminine. But also, it's very important to take into consideration some pop culture associations, like robots that might look like Wall-E or Edie or C-3PO. But also, as we were mentioning before, the task and the interaction that we have can really shape this genderizing. So the kind of task that we ask of ChatGPT might bring us to call it a he or a she. If we ignore this issue, we might fall into three big issues. So first of all, like the transparency. So we might fall into hidden and cover biases. Like for example, before we were talking about the English teacher, and we knew that we're not supposed to get biased when talking about it. But at the same time, the fact that we were thinking about it might create some covert biases into the interaction, which doesn't solve the bias problem, it just makes it harder to recognize in the future. Also the reinforcement, because applying biases is not only about that single interaction that we have, but can also reinforce and consolidate other kinds of biases, also transporting them and translating them in other kinds of interactions with other technology or other people. And eventually, this might also bring to a backlash against AI, so some kind of resistance to it and the erosion of trust, which is really hard to recover from. In literature, there are 4 approaches to bias that are usually mentioned. The first one says that it's ethically permissible to exploit these biases as long as it maximizes the interaction quality. The second one is the complete opposite. So it says that it's always inadmissible to exploit gender cues even if they help in the interaction. Some try to moderate on these 2 first approaches, saying that we can use some gender cues if we do not spread discriminatory bias. And the fourth one is more about action. So the gender cues should be included to limit the spread of biases and to promote some ethical attitudes. These are 4 very different approaches. None of them is final. Like every single one of these approaches has some flaws, obviously, because, for example, even in the last 2 ones that are more moderated, who are we to say which kind of cue is discriminatory or not, or which kind of cue is admissible or not? That will create a whole other level of control that might result in ulterior biases. So this is a very complex issue, and now I want to dive in a little bit about my research. I worked with social robots, and again, we're going to find the competence and warmth as the 2 main concepts into this. This is the robot that I work with. As you can see, it's like a small tabletop robot. It's called Misty, which you can already see. It's very gendered name already. And we can change its eyes, the light that it has in front of it, and make it move as we want. So these are all factors that go into the social part of the interaction. And my research goal is to try to generate and create a mechanical gender for the robot, so that we try to take a step back from the stereotypes and see whether we can promote a more healthy relationship. The steps to create this mechanical gender are mainly three. As we were mentioning before, one of the most important ones is the voice. What I did was create one with Google text-to-speech, lowering the pitch, slowing down the speed of it, and adding a mechanical tone to it so that participants are not immediately prone to ascribe gender. Then I named it with a robotic name, Z3, and the robot, when introducing itself, explicitly communicates the pronouns. Also, the appearance has no additional clothing or accessory. It's very simple because research has shown that the less anthropomorphic the robot is, the less people tend to ascribe gender to it. Now I have a small video demo to show. Okay, basically, I just wanted to show the robot introducing itself with this more mechanically toned voice, and the social cues, changing the eyes, the tilt of the head, and the lights. You can see some frames of it. And yes, it was just to show the importance of first impressions, which is ironic. So basically, what I found in my research is that these two main concepts about warmth and confidence are the main ones, and during the interaction they increase because people get used to this kind of technology, they feel more at ease, and they can also better evaluate the confidence of the robot, which is something that we as humans always do. As soon as we meet someone, we probe their warmth and we try to see whether what they are saying makes sense or not. The confidence factor is really fragile though. These three factors, context, justification of the answer, and the change in the interaction is really important. And as soon as one of these factors drop, then we immediately attribute less competency to the robot or to the technology, bringing some detachment and frustration in the interaction, and also lack of trust, which is very hard to overturn and eventually leads to the abandonment of product if we're talking about a robot or also an AI. But this also applies to human-human interactions, so this would mean the end of the relationship. What I want to highlight is that gender perception can be subjective, though maybe you were thinking about it when I was showing some examples before. So this is a very complex issue. What we can do is try to always be inclusive and listen to users. So keeping a human in the loop is really important to try to overcome all of these issues. Now I wanted to have a little bit of a discussion time about some of the next steps in ethical research there might be, because we are looking at the future of AI, and we need to consider how to apply these insights into practice. It's not enough to have just some guidelines, we need to have some concrete steps to implement them. And this is a famous quote that is attributed to Henry Ford. I really like it. Probably he never said it, but if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. This is just to highlight how with AI and the research that we are doing, this is groundbreaking research and new technology that we've never used before. So we need to address it in a totally new mindset and being aware of all the issues that there might be and try to address all of them. So we need to change our paradigms and change our mindset. So what do you think the next steps in ethical AI might be?
More of a question. You talked about the 4 sort of approaches to dealing with the. Which one of those have you tried, or which ones of those have you tried to employ in your research?
Basically, I'm trying to employ the last 2 approaches, so more of a mediation kind of approach. Implementing a mechanical gender, just to take a step back from any kind of human gender, because at first, my first approach would be to have some kind of non-binary gender for the robot. But that would just shift the problem from binary genders to non-binary genders without actually solving the issue. So that's why I'm trying to implement this mechanical gender, giving up all of our preconceptions about human genders. So yeah, does that answer your question? Yes.
So, what I've observed so far, it looks like the AIs have just been trained to avoid certain subjects that are taboo, like how to make a Molotov cocktail. But for AIs to be truly useful, they're going to need some way to vet people, to understand their intentions, their trustworthiness, and so forth. And that's a really hard thing for people to do. I don't know how an AI would go about that.
Yeah, this is a really complex problem, also because for the AI to be able to do so, someone needs to train it. And that is not straightforward, and there's not one single guideline, even for humans, to do so. So how can we train the AI to be able to handle these issues? It will be the next big questions in research now.
To follow up on that sort of in this context, like, so it would be, like if you had a sexist user, would it be a good thing or a bad thing to give them the gender that they're actually going to treat half decently and then take the results from? Or would the mechanical gender just be sort of the best thing of, all right, here's where things are going, come on now. So
this goes back to the previous question, whether keeping some gender cues is beneficial or not in addressing bias. That is a very complex question.
But even just doing it for individual users, you know, just sort of identifying, okay, this is Bob. Sorry if there's any Bobs here. Okay, Bob's he's misogynistic. We just got to get him to take his pills. Have the pill robot have a male voice.
Yeah. I see how that might be beneficial in the short term for that specific interaction, because Bob will take his pills probably, or maybe more probably than if he was interacting with a female voice. But I think that in the long term, that is really detrimental for any kind of relationships and interactions that Bob might have, because that is not only reinforcing that bias, but it's allowing Bob to think that it's okay. So not only Bob will have this kind of bias during that specific interaction, but he will feel allowed to do so with any other kind of interaction that he has in his daily life.
But if Bob is 70 years old and, you know, he's had 65 years of acculturation to think that this is just the way things are.
Yeah, obviously, in paradigm shifts, the younger minds are easier to change and to make progress. And I think that is the direction we should take. So, not allowing this kind of mindset to shape our research now for the future.
I guess I have kind of a, pretty pessimistic thought, which is if there is another element of gendering, which is the sort of submissive nature of the robots themselves, and the fact that you get to tell them what to do when you're in charge and they do what you tell them, if that also creates a gendering that is inherent to the system.
Yes, as we were mentioning before, both the task and the kind of interaction that we have with any kind of technology, but with robots specifically, will bring up and bring forth every kind of gender stereotype that we have, even covertly in our mind. So it might be that this kind of interaction brings up like feminine bias in the interaction or some more like dominant kind of approach. That is why it's really important to shape not only the voice, the name, and the shape of the robot, but also the interaction that we have with it. So, for example, when I work with the robots and I have my user studies, the kind of interaction that I'm looking for is a more collaborative one. So there is no dominant side in the relationship, it's more collaborative and moving forward together, growing together in the interaction.
How would this play out if, let's say that in the future, AI, the line between an AI and a human kind of blurs up? So like, we have neural computing, so like, kind of like AI and human are assimilating. So in that case, would the human's identity be given a priority over the AI's?
It's a very interesting question. I think that in that scenario, I would feel much safer if today I would be thinking about ethical AI. But it's certainly something to keep in mind and to kind of be prepared for moving forward, so that the more guidelines and safeguards that we can put into place, the better.
The previous slide. So the assumption that in interactions between robots and humans between humans and humans, that incompetence leads to coldness in the other person and so on, that doesn't seem true to me. I mean, that's an absolute, like humans often find incompetence in others endearing or like to teach and like to help. And I think sometimes with humans in the loop with computers that happens as well on with robotics, where that's not something that makes someone cold towards it or hate it. It's something where they feel useful or collaborative.
Yeah, when I mentioned that, it was more of a feminine stereotype that was into place and was studied in 2017 by Fossa and Sukameli. So what they brought forward in this stereotype content model is that obviously that is a bias, a stereotype. It's not always true, but a lot of people were falling into that concept. So it's important to take that into consideration when designing an interaction, because if ascribing a feminine gender creates more of this perception of either warm and incompetent or competent but cold, that is obviously an issue that we don't want to perpetuate, because as you were saying, it is not always true and it's very detrimental as a bias. So, yes.
So like, going back to your first example, you said like you have these images that are being created, especially of teachers, right? But teaching is an industry that's 75% women. So you have a database, your input is going to be 75% one kind of type of gender. How do you balance that? And is that balancing also putting a risk of accuracy of what's going on?
That's a really good question. It is true that some industries are more represented by one gender or the other, but that doesn't mean that when we represent that, we just stick to one of the two. And that is because if you always see one kind of representation in social media, in technology, in interactions, you will end up by thinking that that is the only possible way and the only possible option, which is something that I'd like to avoid completely, because that really kind of create a feedback loop into creating bigger biases and reinforcing them.
What does that balancing look like then, that kind of mechanism that you go in and level it out?
That is really hard, and that is why I'm doing research in this field, because there is no specific answer to that question yet at the moment. I think that we have to try to keep an open mind the most as possible when interacting with technology, and also when feeding data sets to AI specifically, so that we can try to represent all of the possibilities, the realities that we actually see every day in our lives.
But the current AI models kind of using on like public internet data, right? What if we just create like synthetic data or something, and just make sure that like AIs are kind of balanced out like when it comes to the trade data, right? What if something like the synthetic data, like maybe like open source is kind of helpful, because like when you're like open sourcing the model, like Bob or something, like you're kind of like gathering like the ideas from the public instead of just like keeping it like in a single company or like or a lab or something where you're single-handedly like trading it. Just make sure that the public is kind of like balanced out for synthetic data.
This is definitely one of the options right now, and I think it's very viable. As you were mentioning, open source has always proven to be like a very good way to go forward in research specifically, and that to apply it to every context. About the first part, if I'm understanding correctly, you were mentioning creating artificially some data sets and to increase more data in some sectors. I think that might be an option to study further in the future. It is very tricky though, because who decides what kind of data to create? And who has control over it? What kind of representation do we want to put into this new data? Is it even accurate? Like, there are a lot of interesting research questions about it, but it's definitely something that we should explore more. Do you have any other questions? Yes.
The bias you mentioned here is mainly the bias of the user, or both the user and the training database.
It's both a bias that the user has in interaction, but also a bias that designers put into designing the interaction. So from the technology itself, because when you interact with an Alexa and you already have the name that is Alexa, the feminine voice, and the kind of language that is associated with the feminine gender, it's not something that necessarily starts from you, but it's given to you. So there is this two-way street on bias.
Yeah, so is there anything you plan to do to handle with the bias which is driven by the training data?
So can you rephrase the question?
Yeah, is there anything you have done to deal with the bias in the training?
In the training?
Yeah.
That is a good point. Like, training should be oversighted, and there should be, in my opinion, always a human in the loop at a certain level. Obviously, the training of some AI models is not something you can oversee completely, because otherwise it takes away the point of training the model. But we should implement some guidelines and some safeguards to try to avoid this bias in training.
Like what? Like it just delete the gender, or just focus on the capability and delete like the which can lead to the bias, like the gender and somehow other.
Yeah, these are good examples. There are many ways that we can try to do so, and I'm not a technical person, so I wouldn't know the specifics of the training phase for the AI deployment, but those seems like all good points.
Yeah, I just was thinking about whether it's a good way to deal with it, to deal with the premium bias to just delete some factor. Yeah. Maybe it will lose some information as well.
Yeah, that's been proven to be a good way though sometimes to reach some more accurate replies, because sometimes the models take into consideration too many factors, and so sometimes there's overfitting on some factors that are not actually important. So we need to really balance this trade-off between the number of factors and the actual need for them.
Thanks.
Did you have another question?
So, sorry. I think you made a very good point about not just androgenizing like robotics or anything, but is there any negative to doing that with large language models, just taking gender out of the language used for training?
For something that is only text, like a large language model, it's really hard to have people not genderize it, because we genderize it based on just speech, which is like the very minimum that we need for a social interaction. I think it is useful to try to take away all of the gender aspects out of it, like the use of some words or the creation of some sentences with some like intonation that might lead you to ascribe one gender or the other. But as we were saying, gender perception can be very subjective, so it might turn out to be harder than just changing a little bit of language.
Also, like if we wanted to get a human to like I don't know, we think of the term in terms of like being an ethical human, it's not like someone who's had a consciousness of gender biases isn't not aware of the fact that they exist. They're very much aware of the fact that they're imbalanced, but they take a different ethical perspective on it. And in some ways, like if we're just giving it training data that's completely balanced on like the world, it seems like we're not really teaching ethics. We're giving a false picture in some ways, rather than saying like, okay, here's the data out there in the world, but like what perspective do we take on it?
That's a really good point. It is really hard to draw the line between having the data to represent the world and having the data shape the world. Because if you think about like CV screening or loan, when banks decide to give a loan out, then it really shapes the world that we are living in. So I wouldn't want a biased data set to lead to that decision, since it is my life and I'm gonna live based on it. Like the risk of it is just to reinforce a bias, just starting from this innocent idea of representing the world. So if there is,
Can you comment on the contributions coming from academia, industry, and government regulators in this field?
So basically everything that I showed today is from academia and research, because that is my background. So what I've been doing is doing the research with these over-the-shelf robots like the Misty that I showed you before, so anyone can buy it. But then applying research methodologies to user studies and see how people react to those. Yes.
So for kind of solution to the whole gender problem bias, have you ever considered doing a dynamic gender for the machine that we came up with? I think in the comment earlier where some people may just want better or to complete whatever task they're trying to do, if it was gendered toward female or male, somewhere in between. Have you ever considered it?
Yes, I have, and there is some literature from the very last few years in robotics about that. And the choice that I had to make was whether to try to have a gender a neutral robot, a gender fluid robot, or to separate completely from the human genders. And what I found about this gender ambiguous approach is that sometimes it doesn't take the bias out of it, it just adds more bias to it. So that is a tricky approach, because you're just putting a lot of different cues together and you're not really, I guess, solving the problem. So that's why I went to this new road of just trying to forget completely about the human gender and try to implement a mechanical one. But it is certainly something to look more into it.
Yeah, I was just thinking in the mind of like, you usually go to an AI to complete a task, something like write me an answer to this question, show me an image of this thing that doesn't exist, stuff like that. And I figure if you're going to put some form of gender in it, put it in the more beneficial one to get the better end result. It could depend on how well this AI knows the person. Does this person need more exposure to masculine or female type people, so on and so forth. If you're doing like the loan from a bank, you'd say a Midwestern town responds better to a masculine voice, or someone in the city responds better to a feminine.
There is for sure one of the approaches to bias that I was mentioning before, and it is something that works and that it's been done up until now. What I think the issue with that is that I'm given something that I think I need, but reinforcing this need that I think I have. So like the masculine voice for a Midwestern town means that the new generation of Midwestern people will also go forward the masculine voice again. Not because it's something that they need or they want, but it's because it's something that it's done like that. So yeah, to sum up the presentation, thank you for the questions. They were really interesting. And I just think that as developers, the researchers, and users, we have a responsibility now to ensure that these systems are fair, unbiased, and beneficial to all members of society. And I hope that this presentation has given some food for thought about ethical implications of AI and the importance of considering gender and overall biases in AI development.